There is a plant growing on 6 continents that can carry around 5 times more magnesium than spinach, deliver roughly 96% of your daily vitamin C and 73% of your vitamin A in a 100-gram serving of fresh leaves, and throw off around 70,000 seeds from a single plant in one season. Some plants produce more. Those seeds can stay alive in the soil for years, sometimes decades, waiting for the right disturbance, the right light, the right little break in the surface. And millions of people have eaten this plant, or plants in this same food tradition, for generations. So here is the question. How does a plant with that kind of nutritional value, that kind of persistence, and that kind of food history end up being treated in modern Western culture like something to yank out and throw away? And maybe the sharper version is this. How did a plant that solves part of a real nutrition problem so cheaply, so freely, and so stubbornly end up invisible in a world that spends billions trying to sell those same nutrients back to people? The magnesium supplement market is measured in the billions. The global seed business sits above $60 billion. Lamb's quarters keep showing up for free. That is not a small mismatch. The plant is lamb's quarters. Chenopodium album. And once you really look at it, the strange part is not that a few foragers got excited about it. The strange part is how thoroughly ordinary it actually is in so many other places. In northern India, people know it as bathwa and cook it into winter meals, parathas, curries, everyday food. In Nepal, bethu. In Turkey, it lives in village memory. In Mexico, it belongs to the world of quelites, the edible greens people have known how to cook long before modern wellness marketing learned how to sell kale in a prettier font. In Older English, it picked up names like fat hen. Botanists filed it away as Chenopodium album. Farmers learned to hate it under another name entirely, weed. That split matters. When a plant settles into one clear cultural identity, it gets remembered. It gets recipes. It gets aisle space. It gets one stable place in people's heads. Lamb's quarters never got that clean landing in the modern West. It stayed fragmented. One name in the village, another in the field guide, another in the weed report, another in an immigrant kitchen, another in an academic paper. No unified identity, no stable category, no easy place for mainstream memory to hold on to it. And once a plant loses that kind of cultural legibility, erasure gets a lot easier. It can still be common. It can still be useful. It can still be right there at the edge of the yard. But if people have not been taught how to recognize it as one thing, in one coherent way, it starts slipping out of awareness. Still, a naming problem would not matter much if the plant itself were mediocre. It is not. The raw nutrition numbers are the part most people stumble on first, and they should. In fresh leaves, lamb's quarters has been described with about 96% of daily vitamin C, 73% of vitamin A, around 31% of calcium, and strong levels of riboflavin and manganese, all for roughly 43 calories. Compared with spinach, the plant comes out with about twice the vitamin B1, twice the vitamin B2, 3 times the vitamin C, and around 3 times the calcium. Against kale, it pushes past it on vitamin A and compares well on protein, fiber, and mineral density. And the magnesium number is the one that changes the tone of the whole conversation, about 5 times more than common greens like spinach, lettuce, or cabbage. That is not technically edible. That is not survival food if you're desperate. That is a serious plant. Then you get to the seeds, and the case gets even stronger. Fresh leaves already have a better protein profile than most people expect from a volunteer green. But dried seeds have been reported in the range of about 16.6 to 19.7% protein. That is not decorative. That is useful. That is a plant offering more than one form of value, more than one harvest, more than one way into the kitchen. And one of the cleanest comparisons in the whole story is quinoa. Quinoa became a premium ancient superfood. It got clean packaging, wellness branding, influencer bowls, recipe blogs, and a price per pound. Lamb's quarters is a close relative in the same genus. One got elevated. One got dismissed. And yet, the nutritional literature cited in the draft points to Chenopodium album comparing extremely well, even outperforming quinoa in some nutraceutical and amino acid measures, so the free weed can go toe-to-toe with the expensive superfood. That alone should make people stop for a second. And the plant gets even more interesting once you stop looking only at raw nutrient counts and start looking at how those nutrients behave. Spinach is the obvious comparison because people trust it, but spinach also has a reputation for high oxalates, which can bind to minerals like calcium and magnesium and reduce how much the body can actually use. Lamb's quarters is not magically free of that conversation, but it has been described with a more favorable oxalate to calcium plus magnesium relationship than spinach or beet in some comparisons. In plain English, the number on the page may interfere less on the way into the body. That is a big difference. It means the plant is not only rich on paper. It may be functionally better than some of the greens people already assume are the gold standard, so at this point the plant has already cleared several thresholds. It is nutrient dense, it is versatile, it is not fringe, it is not a gimmick, and honestly, that still is not the most remarkable part. The deepest value of Lamb's quarters is structural. This plant behaves like a system. Most garden crops ask a lot from you. You pick the variety, buy the seed, start the tray, baby the seedlings, water, fertilize, shade, protect, replant, worry, and then do the whole thing again next season. Even when the harvest is worth it, the relationship is still built on repeated intervention and repeated purchases. Lamb's quarters plays a different game. One plant can produce roughly 72,000 seeds. Some produce over 100,000. Under strong conditions, some reports push the count far higher. A single patch can turn into a real seed bank. Then those seeds do what seed catalogs cannot promise you. They wait. Studies cited in the draft put seed longevity anywhere from about 12 years to 78 years, with documented germination even after 20 years underground and viable seed still turning up after 40. So when people say the plant comes back, that phrase is almost too polite. It does not just come back. It establishes memory in the soil. That changes the economics immediately. A plant like this does not ask you to begin from zero every spring. It does not need a carefully maintained pipeline of repurchasing to stay in the landscape. It does not collapse the moment you stop managing it like a fragile project. It persists. It volunteers. It waits for you to stop fighting it. And it does all that while tolerating conditions that make softer crops complain. Poor soil, heavy soil, sandy soil, disturbed soil, drought pressure, salinity, heat, construction edges, rough corners of a yard where the ground is compacted and ugly, and nobody is trying to make a lifestyle real about what grows there. Lamb's quarters sees opportunity in places. Polished gardening culture often writes off. You know that corner, by the way? The one beside the compost edge? The patch behind the raised bed where the hose doesn't quite reach? The strip by the fence where the soil looks tired and the glamorous crops lose interest? Lamb's quarters is often there already, doing its own quiet math. That is why the plant deserves more than a nutrition label. It deserves to be understood as a low-input food system, not in some fantasy prepper sense, in a very plain, almost boringly practical sense. Let it exist. Harvest the young growth. Let a few go to seed. Stop spending energy destroying something that is already volunteering to feed you, and that is exactly where the modern conflict enters. A plant that feeds people for free is not automatically celebrated in a culture built around recurring transactions. The magnesium supplement market is a good example. The draft cites a global magnesium supplement market at about $3.5 billion in 2023. with projections pushing toward nearly $7 billion by 2032. That market depends on a familiar cycle. People run low, symptoms pile up, bottles get bought, the bottles empty, more bottles get bought. Oxide, citrate, glycinate, on and on. A free plant with a strong magnesium profile does not slot neatly into that bottle cycle, especially not if it keeps returning on its own. And the seed side is no different. The global seed business above $60 billion runs on repetition, control, and reselling. Annual crops, hybrid lines, patented lines, recurring input logic. A plant that reseeds itself aggressively, naturalizes, and keeps showing up without asking for a fresh annual transaction is not a dream customer. It is a broken business model. That does not mean somebody sat in a room and said, "Let's erase lamb's quarters." It means attention follows what can be packaged. Research follows what can be funded. Marketing follows what can be owned, repeated, and sold cleanly. And lamb's quarters is awkward inside all of those systems. Then add one more layer: row crop agriculture. If your world is corn rows, soybean rows, predictable yield, uniform fields, and a hard line between crop and non-crop, lamb's quarters is not being evaluated as food. It is being evaluated as interference. The draft includes figures like 13% yield loss in corn and 25% in soybeans under certain competitive conditions. So, of course, weed science learned to hate it. Herbicide language grew around it. From the perspective of monoculture, this plant is not nutrition, it is disruption. And once a plant gets frozen inside that category, the rest of the story writes itself. Children are taught to pull it. Gardeners learn to see it as mess. Stores do not need to sell it because the thing grows by itself. Supplement aisles do not have much incentive to point people toward a volunteer green, so the plant that solved the problem too cheaply drifted into the background. There is actually a very good parallel in the draft. White clover. For years, clover belonged in lawns because it fixed nitrogen naturally. Then herbicide companies needed a broader market. Clover became a target. What used to count as beneficial got reclassified as something to kill. That is a useful reminder. Categories move when markets move. And there is another loop here that matters more than people think. Soil depletion. A lot of modern food is abundant in volume and thinner in depth. The draft leans on the idea that industrial farming stripped trace minerals out of the ground and failed to replace them well. So people end up eating food that looks normal, even healthy, while the mineral density underneath keeps slipping. Bodies run low. Magnesium deficiency becomes common. Then the answer gets sold back in bottles instead of rebuilt through soil and food relationships. Lamb's quarter sits right in the middle of that contradiction. It grows in rougher places. It reaches where shallower-rooted crops may not. It concentrates value from ground other plants struggle to use. And then it gets called a weed. That is not just ironic. That is almost absurd. And once you pull back far enough, history starts making the blind spot even harder to defend. One of the strongest supports in the draft is the bog body material. Toland Man, preserved for more than 2,400 years, still carrying the evidence of what he ate. Researchers studying the stomach contents found a mix of grains and wild plants, with this food world showing up clearly in the meal. Another bog body nearby pointed in a similar direction. That matters because it forces a simple correction. Plants like this were not random roadside desperation. They belonged to real human food systems. People knew what they were doing with them. Then the pattern shows up again in another place entirely. In eastern North America, long before maize took over, indigenous agricultural systems were already building around seed-bearing plants from this goosefoot family. The Eastern Agricultural Complex exists for a reason. Russell Cave and other archaeological sites preserve that memory. So again, you have different people, in different landscapes, under different pressures, arriving at the same conclusion. This plant family was worth cultivating, storing, and eating, And the story does not stop in archaeology. That is important, because the fastest way to make a plant feel distant is to trap it in the past. Lamb's quarters never stayed trapped there. People kept eating it. South Asian kitchens never forgot Bathua. Mexican cooking traditions never stopped knowing the larger world of edible greens that modern Western food culture tends to overlook. Older generations in parts of Europe still recognize it too. The knowledge did not disappear everywhere. It got cut off from one particular mainstream. That is a very different kind of forgetting. You can even see that split in the present. The draft points to immigrant communities in places like Los Angeles recognizing the plant immediately while their American neighbors ignore it. Urban foragers in New York now teach it. Community gardens in Detroit harvest it. So the plant did not vanish. Recognition just became uneven. Some people still know exactly what they are looking at. Others walk past it for years. And that brings the whole thing back where it belongs: the yard, the hand, the kitchen. If lamb's quarters is growing where you are, the young plant usually gives itself away with a pale, dusty, almost flowery coating on the newest leaves. Not mold, not damage. Just that mealy look that makes the leaf surface seem almost unwettable at first. The leaves are usually triangular or diamond-shaped with irregular teeth. Later, the plant throws up dense clusters of tiny green flowers. Once you have seen it a few times, it stops hiding from you. You start spotting it at the edge of beds, beside paths, around compost, near disturbance, in the overlooked spaces where the polished garden story thins out a little. And there is something slightly humbling about that moment. You realize how many times you probably pulled it without asking what it was. For eating, the young stage is usually the sweet spot. Around 6 to 8 inches tall, the top growth is tender, mild, easy to work with. Keep pinching the top growth and the plant keeps giving you more soft new leaves. That repeat harvest rhythm matters. It means you are not waiting for one big dramatic payoff. You are working with a plant that responds. In the kitchen, the easiest rule is the best one. Treat it like a normal green. Sauté it with garlic. Fold it into eggs. Drop it into soup at the end. Cook it down the way you would spinach. Work it into flatbreads, savory fillings, beans, brothy dishes. The flavor is mild, slightly mineral, familiar enough that it does not need a speech before dinner. That is part of its value. It can slip into ordinary life instead of demanding a performance. And if you let the season run longer, the seeds offer another use. When the seed heads darken and dry, they can be stripped, winnowed, toasted, boiled into porridge, or ground into flour. So the plant is not just handing you leaves, it is handing you a second food form and the means to keep the relationship going. There is one caution worth keeping plain. Harvest from clean ground. Skip sprayed lots, contaminated edges, busy roadsides, anywhere you do not trust the soil. A tough plant can grow in compromised places. That does not make every place a harvest site. But a clean backyard bed, a known garden edge, a patch you manage yourself without chemicals, that is different. And if oxalates are a concern for you, brief blanching works the same way it does with other greens. Simple, not dramatic. That, maybe, is what I like most about lamb's quarters. It does not need to be romanticized, it does not need to be turned into a trend. It just needs to be seen clearly, because once you see it clearly, a few things become very hard to unsee. A plant can be highly nutritious and still be culturally invisible. A plant can feed millions and still be dismissed by people who live right beside it. A plant can solve a part of a real deficiency problem and still lose the naming war, the aisle space war, the marketing war. And a plant that keeps returning on its own can look like a nuisance in any system that expects value to arrive inside repeated purchases. So if lamb's quarters comes up in your garden this year, maybe do not go straight to reflex. Pause, look at the leaves, rub that dusty coating between your fingers. Notice where it chose to grow. Harvest the tender tops once, before you decide what category it belongs in. Because a plant like this is not just offering one meal. It is offering continuity. It is offering one more way to build a garden that gives something back without constant rebuying, replanting, and resolving the same problem through another transaction. And for something that has spent so long being treated like a nuisance, that is a remarkably generous offer. The seeds can sit in the soil for years, longer than a trend, longer than a label, longer than the habit that taught people to ignore them. The only real question is what you will see when they finally come back up. A weed, or a food plant that never stopped trying to return.